can you connect the dots for us? Because, Danielle, there's a point that locally, right, the machinery of the GOP is very successful. Specifically, what they have told us openly, what they're doing is they're taking over city councils. They're taking over hospital boards. They're taking over school boards. They're taking over poll workers. They're using violence and threats and intimidation. And now there's studies coming out every week where people are voluntarily ceding the ground. Poll workers are like, I'm done. There's just no way. And you know that the minority then, by using these threats, just takes over city by city by city. And Steve Bannon has said that that's the plan. He says we went after school boards and now we're going after hospital boards. And, speaking about Missouri, Missouri now is on steroids with what DeSantis is doing, is that now, they're literally defunding their own libraries to get rid of all the quote unquote woke books. And because you've written about demagogues, and Danielle was an educator and I'm a writer, talk to us about how this is so imperative for the Demagoguery playbook to go after the books, to go after the stories, to go after the multiracial, multicultural curriculum. Because I think people don't realize that there is a historical precedent here with what's happening. Why is this so important for the demagogue?
Yeah, I'll say that just to share my beliefs and understanding after thinking about these things for some time. I'll just quickly touch on the fact that I think, for example, Trump has 4 diagnoses. 2 of them are clinical. This is my thought. I'm not making a diagnosis because my prior career was psychiatry. But narcissistic personality, and most importantly, if people want to look, antisocial personality. There's just no question for the layperson, if you look at those, that Trump meets these. They're important in a way, but they're nowhere near as important as Trump's political diagnoses. And so you've alluded to, and I started writing early about Trump being a demagogue, but he has also demonstrated, and his behavior helped to demonstrate he's authoritarian, but also remarkably, the January 6th committee research helped to demonstrate that he is authoritarian. So the best term to use, by the way, for Trump is an authoritarian demagogue. I won't go into why, but we do need to call him a demagogue, because if you use that word and you do research in history, you find yourself going back 2,500 years to ancient Athens, and you can come forward and study and understand that the nemesis or Achilles heel of democracy is demagogues. What's happening in the Republican Party, it has something to do, right, as you're saying, with imitating global phenomenon like Hungary. But I do think that leadership is paramount. And so Trump has created a cult of personality within the Republican Party that is both demagogic and authoritarian. And so very sadly, throughout the country, as you're making allusion to, there's a sense that this authoritarianism, or a first step to that, as I think I mentioned earlier, is constitutional hardball, which means you do everything you can shy of breaking the law in order to push your agenda or defeat the enemy on the other side, of course. And that's a fundamental problem we have. We don't see it as we have citizens of differing opinions on the other side, but the enemy on the other side. But I can just respond to it by saying it's alarming and it's extremely dangerous, but we have no other option but to fight it with all the tools that we have. We have to fight against this. I don't know what the future will be, but we have to fight against it with ethical standards, the best of our democratic principles, and the best of our democratic behavioral values and political values, and protest. You just have to push back. I know it's unsatisfying, but I don't have any other option than that. And could things spiral into worsening violence? Yes. The real question is, if authoritarianism continues to grow in our country, what are those of us who love democracy and liberty and freedom, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? It's up to us. So that could take us to the important question of how important it is at times of crisis like we're in now for people to recognize that democracy is a political system of the people, and that getting involved in some way on the right side of history behind ethical constitutional democracy, another piece I'll add, rooted, believe it or not, rooted in malice towards none and charity for all, is the direction to go. And whether that wins the battle in a year or 10 years or 20 years, I don't know, but that's the beauty of life, those things. So democracy, if we lose it, it will be resurrected. Who knows what will happen in our country? We could divide, balkanize into separate countries. Maybe one of those, and I'm not talking in 10 years. I don't know. We don't know what the future is. But I can tell you this. If January 6th had been worse, or if we have another thing like January 6th, where the military is involved, and we have the installation of an arbitrary government, what are we going to do? Cry about it? No. Eventually, what's going to happen is we're going to work for years and years and years, like during the American Revolution, to try and resolve this through civil disobedience and international intervention. And if that doesn't work, some of us are going to have to break away and try and start a new democracy, maybe California and other. This sounds fantasy, and I'm not encouraging it, but it's just a fact. John Locke has taught us. We started with the principles of John Locke saying, if there's arbitrary government, you have a right of revolution. And again, that can be nonviolent revolution, peaceful revolution, but at some point, if there is the installation of an arbitrary government in our country, we can either just sit back and say, well, I've lost my liberties and freedoms, but it's not the end of the world. Or we can decide, nope, we're going to fight this.
You know, it's so interesting that you say this, because I tell you that, you know, what was it, 7, 8 years ago, if we were having this conversation, I would say that you were crazy. All of the things that we have lived through and experienced over the last 7, including the pandemic, right? That showed us many ways in which government can work in our favor and government can work against us, right? We're two sides of the COVID pandemic. The beginning, where you had a president telling us it was a hoax and not going to do anything to help us. And then on the other hand, you know, working as quickly as possible, another administration to get shots in arms. When you look at how government can function to actually help the people and do so in a rapid way, and then you see this political party, this Republican Party, working overtime to destroy, right? Like we saw, you know, we've seen the derailment that happened in East Palestine, right? Why did that happen? Because the Republican Party decided that they were going to deregulate, right, and not ensure that we have fast breaking trains because it's too expensive, right? You have all of these things that begin to show you slowly but surely the ways in which the Republican Party is working against the people. And I think, just to go back to Waj's, you know, opening with Tennessee, is that I feel like Tennessee is just so blatant, right? Like it was as blatant, if not more so, than January 6th, right? The question that I have for you, Eli, is that, you know, the scary thing to me about where Trump is headed, and Trumpism, not just Trump the person, because we've moved beyond the person, right? That the cancer has spread here of fascism, of authoritarianism, like it is in the veins of this country right now, is Donald Trump's speech recently in Waco, Texas. Donald Trump talking about, I alone will be your retribution. This demagoguery is now televangelism, right? In a way that there is this religious war that these people want, right? That they're willing to sacrifice in so many ways in order to see through this vision, this imagined vision that they have for this Christo-fascist nationalist nation. And I just wonder, in all of the different machinations that you offered, I got to be honest with you, I don't see one that is bloodless. I really don't. Because I think that this Republican Party is so, their desire is violence, right? The desire, when you see members of Congress replace flag pins with AR-15s, when you see the former president of the United States go to the site of one of the biggest, you know, cult standoffs, right, that has now become the breeding ground of white nationalism, and one of their places, you know, that you visit, like Mount Rushmore or the American. It's like, I don't see how this is bloodless. Am I correct?
Danielle, don't forget the January 6th choir that he had.
Yeah. It's quite scary. So I know that you don't have a crystal ball, but I'm kind of looking I know that every election is the most consequential, but I'm thinking that this next presidential election may be the most violent that we've seen since the 1800s.
Yeah, it might be. And I think the crucial starting point is to recognize that the Democratic Party is on the right side of history. Mm. And mentioning the word history, I'll share with you that I do not think human beings are smart enough by themselves to solve deep, complex problems like the one we're facing right now with our politics today, and with the slide into corruption of the Republican Party and the media. So when I say that, what I really mean to say is we need history. I want to be sensitive to, is that my bias? Because that's my field. But if 1,000 other people hadn't said that, I might be concerned. But we need our history books, and we need to know what are all the strategies that have been used to fight against demagoguery, corruption, and authoritarianism. And so we really need to go back to MLK. I mean, there's just never been a more wise and enlightened and caring and loving and fierce person who has fought against these exact same forces. So that was relatively bloodless, or at least it was bloodless on the part of those who protested with MLK. But I do also, not because I'm promoting revolution, we need to understand history. And remarkably enough, this would be a great, I think, paradox. The founders, of course, who had severe tragic flaws related to slavery, they may actually offer us a playbook for how to proceed in the future at some point. And I want to emphasize when I say that, they were very dedicated for years and years and years, for at least 10 years, to civil disobedience. And it was only when the British brought about bloodshed that the Americans said, this is important enough. I mean, it's in some ways similar to the problems of today. The white Americans, believe it or not, then felt they were being treated as second-class citizens in the British Empire, which, again, reminds us of the way people of color are treated in the United States today. So I think we need to understand this history. We need to read John Locke, not because we're racing for revolution. We just have to see how these things proceed. And so the real question, I think, is, and I don't know, again, I'm not even comfortable with us talking about bloodshed, but in the fight for rights and democracy and freedom, will Democrats be courageous enough and strong enough and self-sacrificing enough to keep the fight alive and going, and ultimately to win it?
Eli,
that is the question.
People they're looking at their Instagrams and all of this stuff. So I just don't know. I don't know whether that moral courage and commitment to democracy exists sufficiently enough for the fight to continue if it gets to arbitrary government.